the hidden ADHD symptom that is ruining your sleep. The sleep struggle you never linked to ADHD. It's 2:47 a.m. You've brushed your teeth, turned off the lights, maybe even been staring at your ceiling for an hour. You're exhausted, but your brain? It's suddenly holding a late-night TED Talk on every mistake you've ever made. So you reach for your phone, scroll for a bit, and tell yourself, just 10 more minutes. Suddenly, it's 4 a.m. You fall asleep, only to wake up feeling like a zombie with an existential crisis. Here's the thing, this pattern isn't laziness. It's not poor discipline. It's not even necessarily insomnia in the traditional sense. For many people living with ADHD, this exact loop is caused by something deeper and almost invisible, a timing glitch in the brain's internal rhythm. Your mind and body are basically running on different clocks. Think of it like this. Most people's brains start dimming the lights around 10 p.m. But if you've got ADHD, your lights don't naturally fade until midnight or later. Your system wants to start winding down, but your dopamine levels keep the party going. You feel alert, creative, sometimes even euphoric, right when the world expects you to be unconscious. Scientists call this mismatched delayed sleep phase syndrome, or DSPD. It's not just being a night owl. It's a biological shift in your circadian rhythm, the body's natural clock that regulates sleep, hormones, temperature, even mood. In many ADHD brains, this clock is delayed several hours behind the rest of society's schedule. And that lag creates chaos. You might try to force yourself to bed early, only to lie awake anxious and restless. Then you wake up groggy, frustrated, and full of shame for not being able to just sleep like a normal person. That emotional spiral is why so many people never realize it's not their fault. Their brain's timing system is simply wired differently. But here's the hopeful part. You can recalibrate it. Understanding the neurochemistry behind that delay actually gives you leverage. Once you see how dopamine and melatonin, the brain's alertness and sleep hormones, interact, the pattern starts making sense. When dopamine stays high at night, it blocks melatonin from doing its job. So your brain never gets the memo that it's bedtime until hours too late. By mapping this misfiring circuit, you stop treating your sleep problem like a moral failure and start treating it as a mechanical issue, something you can adjust. Think of it like realizing your clock app was set to the wrong time zone. You don't yell at the phone, you just change the setting. In this video, we're going deep into what causes this delay, how your brain chemistry works differently from a neurotypical one, and how to actually realign your rhythm without fighting yourself into exhaustion. We'll move from the biology of ADHD's internal clock, through the science of light exposure and hormones, all the way to practical solutions that work with your brain instead of against it. And since this is unplugged psychology, we're also going to touch on something most people leave out, the spiritual rhythm hidden underneath all this. Because if your life feels like it's running slightly out of sync with the universe, maybe it's not just metaphorical. Your circadian system literally controls how you harmonize with day and night, the most ancient rhythm of all. Learning to sync with it isn't just better sleep, it's self-alignment in the truest sense. So no, you're not lazy, broken, or hopeless at mornings. You're operating on delayed software. But the beauty of biology is, it can be updated. Let's crack open your brain's secret clock and figure out why it ticks differently. The ADHD brain's secret clock. Every human body runs on a built-in timing system called the circadian rhythm. It's like an internal 24-hour operating schedule that tells you when to feel awake, when to get hungry, and when to power down for sleep. Normally, this rhythm syncs pretty neatly with sunlight. Morning light kicks your brain into gear. Evening darkness whispers, wind down. But for people with ADHD, that internal clock doesn't tick in harmony with the sun. It runs late, sometimes by 2, 3, even 4 hours. That means when most people's biological night begins, an ADHD brain is still in full broadcast mode. Creativity spikes, impulsive ideas surge. You might suddenly want to reorganize your entire bookshelf or start researching obscure topics you didn't care about all day. And when you finally decide to go to bed, your body says, not yet. It's not defiance. It's biology lagging behind the external world. To understand why, picture the circadian system as a digital dashboard with multiple dials. Core body temperature, hormone timing, alertness, digestion. In a neurotypical brain, those dials rise and fall in a smooth wave across 24 hours. In an ADHD brain, that wave is shifted later. It still has all the same peaks and valleys, they just happen on a delayed schedule. The result is being fully alert at midnight and half-conscious at 9 a.m., no matter how many alarms you set. Now, one of the biggest culprits behind this lag is dopamine, the chemical that controls motivation and interest. In the average brain, dopamine levels slowly taper as evening approaches, allowing melatonin, the hormone that signals night, to take control. But ADHD brains hold on to dopamine surge longer, almost like the party guest who refuses to leave. That late-night dopamine spike keeps the brain stimulated, blocking melatonin's signal to dim the lights. It's like your internal clock app has notifications turned on 3 hours too late. While someone else's brain says sleep mode at 10 p.m., yours pings new message, inspiration, at 1 a.m. And because dopamine and melatonin are tightly linked, that delay doesn't just shift sleep, it shifts the entire rhythm of your day. Let's break that down more simply. Think of dopamine as your alertness coach and melatonin as your bedtime DJ. In most people, the coach clocks out before the DJ arrives, leaving room for relaxation. But in ADHD, the coach stays shouting motivational quotes in your ear while the DJ's trying to play a lullaby. The hormones end up talking over each other, and your brain can't decide which mood to follow. This chemical tug-of-war explains a lot of the midnight energy ADHD folks describe. You're not lying when you say you suddenly focus best after everyone else is asleep. Your biology literally supports that pattern, because dopamine's peak overlaps with the hours most brains are winding down. Unfortunately, society doesn't share that rhythm. Work, school, appointments, all tuned to early light. So your natural high-focus window lands when the world's closed for business. That's why people with ADHD often confuse circadian delay with anxiety or racing thoughts. You might lie in bed thinking, "Why can't I stop overthinking?" when really your brain's chemistry hasn't even started its nighttime shutdown process yet. The sleep hormone hasn't arrived. The engines are still on full throttle. Here's the strange part though. This delay isn't random. Neuroscientists think it's related to dopamine's role in time perception. ADHD brains tend to underestimate how much time passes. The same chemical system that makes deadlines sneak up on you also shifts your sense of day and night. When dopamine operates late, your internal definition of now stretches. Midnight doesn't feel like midnight. It feels like early evening. So by the time you're ready for rest, the clock has sprinted ahead hours. And that lag creates real-world fallout. You oversleep, rush through mornings, chase energy with coffee, then crash mid-afternoon, starting the cycle again. The next night, your body remembers the previous pattern and delays melatonin yet again. Over time, your rhythm becomes locked in a feedback loop, where sleep deprivation worsens focus, which destabilizes dopamine even more. Most people try to fix this by sheer willpower. I'll just go to bed earlier tonight. But if your brain's internal lighting panel is set to daylight, until 1 a.m., lying there in the dark only breeds frustration. The real key is learning how to shift that internal timer, not forcing it. So, what you're dealing with isn't a lack of discipline. It's an out-of-phase biological clock. Your brain still has a rhythm. It's simply tuned to a later beat. Once you recognize that, the self-criticism starts to drop away. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "How do I adjust the rhythm so life fits my brain?" That reframing matters more than you think. Because underneath the frustration of missed mornings and restless nights is a deep truth. Your system isn't broken. It's simply calibrated to a different time zone. The goal isn't to fight it, but to understand it well enough to guide it back into sync with daylight. And that's exactly where we're heading next. Into the condition that gives this delay its official name, and the science behind why you can't just go to bed earlier. What DSPD actually is, and why it's not just staying up late. So now that we know your brain's internal clock tends to run late, let's put a name to what's happening. Delayed sleep phase disorder, or DSPD for short. It sounds technical, but it basically means your biological night starts later than everyone else's. Not because you prefer to stay up, not because you're addicted to your phone, but because your sleep-wake signals are literally pushed back on the 24-hour dial. Here's what that looks like in real physiology. Every day, your brain releases melatonin, your internal night signal, around the time your body temperature begins to drop. For most people, that happens around 9 or 10 p.m. For someone with DSPD, that entire cascade can start 2 to 6 hours later. So while your roommate is yawning at 10, you're still in mental daylight at midnight. By the time melatonin finally peaks, it's 2 or 3 in the morning, and your body finally goes, "Okay, bedtime now." This isn't just a personality quirk. It's measurable. In sleep labs, researchers track dim light melatonin onset, the moment your brain begins releasing melatonin when lights go down. People with DSPD and ADHD show this onset far later than typical adults, often aligned closer to the schedules of overnight workers. Their core body temperature, the other reliable circadian marker, drops later too. That means your body's chemistry literally exists in a shifted time zone. Now, being a night owl is different. Night owls choose to stay up, but if the schedule's changed, they can adapt after a few days. DSPD doesn't budge like that. If you try to push bedtime earlier by force, you just lie awake for hours. The circadian rhythm resists. It's anchored by light exposure, dopamine patterns, and genetic factors. You can't negotiate it by sheer effort. Here's a story that shows the difference. A friend of mine, Alex, used to joke they were nocturnal because they did their best work after midnight. But when Alex got a job that required a 7 a.m. start, no amount of early alarms or sleep hygiene podcasts helped. They'd go to bed at 10, toss until 2, wake groggy and miserable. After a few weeks of sleep logs, it became obvious their rhythm wasn't adjustable through discipline. It was biologically delayed. That's DSPD in action, not preference, but physiology. And this is where ADHD sneaks into the picture again. Studies show a big overlap between ADHD and DSPD. Some cite up to 75% of people with ADHD reporting delayed sleep cycles. That suggests the two aren't just occasional companions. They may share a root cause. When your dopamine system lags behind, it doesn't just affect focus, it drags your entire circadian rhythm with it. This misalignment can seriously mess with your day-to-day life. Imagine living in Los Angeles while your internal clock is stuck in New York time. You'd constantly wake up jet-lagged for no reason. That's what DSPD does daily. The world wants you awake and sharp by 8 a.m., but your brain's morning might not start until 11. So you spend the first few hours operating in cognitive dusk. No wonder coffee feels like life support. Confusion sets in quickly, because on weekends you're fine. You naturally drift to sleep around 2 a.m., wake at 10, and feel human again. Monday hits. The alarm slices through your REM cycle at 6:30, and you swear you were more productive in your dreams. So you end up chasing sleep all week, napping, guzzling caffeine, and hitting that dreaded second wind just as the clock hits midnight. Each night you promise to fix it, and each night your brain refuses to shut down. Now, here's the kicker. Your circadian rhythm doesn't care about social expectation. It listens to light and chemistry. For most of human history, that worked fine because we lived by sunlight and firelight. But in a screen-lit century, light cues are scrambled. Phones, LEDs, and indoor workspaces all send the wrong feedback to your brain's clock. For someone with ADHD, whose dopamine already delays melatonin production, the extra evening brightness is like pouring gasoline on a flickering flame. This disconnect fuels what psychologists call the exhaustion and shame loop. You wake too early, can't focus, feel guilty about underperforming, then stay up late trying to catch up. That guilt keeps stress hormones high, which further delays sleep. By the weekend, your body collapses into a recovery schedule that deepens the delay, a phenomenon researchers nickname social jet lag. You're never synced. Too early for society, too late for your biology. And the emotional toll is real. People start labeling themselves lazy or undisciplined. Teachers scold kids who oversleep. Partners misinterpret late nights as avoidance. It's a loop of misunderstanding, because almost nobody talks about sleep timing as a neurological trait. DSPD hides in plain sight, disguised as procrastination or poor planning. It's worth pausing here, though. This delay doesn't make you defective. It just means your internal timekeeper is tuned differently. In evolutionary terms, late chronotypes actually had survival advantages. Early humans needed night watchers, the ones whose dopamine stayed high while others slept. You might just carry that same wiring, except society no longer operates on a 24-hour village rhythm. Still, understanding the mechanics gives you leverage. Once you see it's not mystery insomnia, but a biological reset scheduled too late, you can start adjusting your environment instead of blaming your willpower. Things like early light exposure, behavioral anchors, and melatonin timing all become tools, not punishments, to coax your rhythm back into sync. And here's the bridge to what's next. We haven't yet talked about why dopamine delays everything in the first place. What's happening deep in the nervous system that keeps your internal day starting hours late? That's where things get fascinating. Because dopamine isn't just the feel-good molecule, it's your brain's scheduling software. And in ADHD, that software runs on a different clock altogether. The dopamine delay mechanism. Okay, so let's peel back another layer and talk about what's really happening under the hood. We've already seen that people with ADHD often feel wide awake when everyone else is winding down. But the reason isn't just habit, it's dopamine. Dopamine isn't only the pleasure chemical you hear about in pop psychology posts. It's a signal regulator, a timing mechanism, even a kind of internal metronome that tells your brain when to pay attention and when to switch modes. And in ADHD, that metronome is late. Here's the strange truth. Your dopamine activity doesn't just control motivation. It actually helps set the start time of your biological day. Early in the morning, when neurotypical brains begin ramping up dopamine and cortisol together, alertness blooms naturally. But in ADHD, the dopamine system often fires slower and later. Then, when everyone else's system is calming down, your dopamine finally catches up, creating a delayed surge at night. It's almost like your energy cycle is running one shift behind the solar calendar. Think of dopamine as the sun in your brain's tiny universe. When it rises, everything else, the hormones, energy, and focus, follows suit. Now imagine that sunrise happens 3 hours too late. That's what the ADHD dopamine pattern looks like. Research using brain scans and neurotransmitter testing shows that dopamine transporter proteins, which clear dopamine after it's used, operate sluggishly at night in ADHD individuals. That means dopamine lingers in the system longer, overstimulating neural circuits that should already be dimming for sleep. Normally, decreasing dopamine tells the body, okay, time to unwind. Melatonin then steps forward to orchestrate rest. But if dopamine keeps tapping the drums, melatonin can't take the stage. It's literally suppressed. Your pineal gland doesn't get the proper signal to start releasing it. So even if you dim the lights and lie quietly in bed, your hormonal message for sleep now never fully sends. You might close your eyes, but your chemistry hasn't agreed to the plan. One neuroscientist described this pattern as circadian lag via dopaminergic interference. Fancy phrase, but what it really means is that dopamine's timing conflicts with your built-in sleep gate. Remember that delicate seesaw between melatonin and cortisol? Dopamine sits in the middle, nudging the balance toward wakefulness. So a delayed dopamine curve pushes the entire wave of hormones forward: melatonin, cortisol, and even body temperature. Your biological day effectively starts and ends late because dopamine says so. Here's a concrete example. Let's say your brain spikes dopamine at 11 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. That pushes cortisol production later too, since cortisol release depends on dopamine cues from the brainstem. Then melatonin, which should climb gradually alongside darkness, stays quiet until the dopamine settles. By the time melatonin finally rises, it's past midnight, and you only get a fraction of the deep restorative sleep you need before morning alarms yank you out again. Over weeks or months, that pattern compounds into exhaustion. Here's a funny but accurate way to picture it. Your brain basically thinks midnight is 9 p.m. When your alarm goes off at 7, it's like being forced to get up at 4 in the middle of your brain's night. No wonder mornings feel like a crime scene. That's dopamine's delay at work. Your entire system is offset because it tracks time internally, not by the clock on your phone. And then comes the vicious cycle. Once you start sleeping less, dopamine regulation worsens. Studies show sleep deprivation lowers dopamine receptor sensitivity, meaning it takes more stimulation to feel awake or rewarded. So you chase more novelty, scrolling, snacking, binge-watching, and that extra stimulation pumps dopamine at the wrong time yet again. Before long, your delayed bedtime isn't just a pattern. It's a biochemical rut carved by rescue behaviors trying to restore balance. Everything in your waking life feeds into this loop. Caffeine, for example, increases dopamine activity. Taken too late in the day, it reinforces the delay. Screens and blue light? They trigger alertness circuits through dopamine-linked retinal neurons. Even emotional highs, creativity, excitement, anxiety, all dial the same system upward. Each of those pushes your perceived daytime forward, confusing the circadian machinery that runs quietly underneath consciousness. People often ask, why does my brain suddenly get creative at night? The simplest answer: because dopamine finally shows up to the party. Around midnight, your brain chemistry hits the sweet spot of dopamine and acetylcholine balance. The default mode network lights up. Ideas connect freely, focus sharpens. It feels amazing, until you realize it's 3 a.m. You weren't chasing inspiration, it was chasing you. Now, when dopamine stays elevated late into the night, melatonin isn't the only casualty. Cortisol, the stress and alertness hormone, also misfires. It either peaks way too late, leaving you wired into the early morning, or crashes prematurely, making you groggy midday. This wobble confuses every other system downstream: metabolism, immune response, even mood regulation. You begin living slightly out of sync with yourself, like the instruments of an orchestra tuning up at different tempos. And there's another subtle feedback loop people overlook: body temperature. Normally, temperature falls slightly at night to cue sleep. Dopamine, however, promotes alertness by increasing thermogenesis. In delayed dopamine patterns, core temperature doesn't drop when it should, making your body literally too warm to fully rest. That's why cold rooms, showers, or weighted blankets feel strangely helpful. They bypass the dopamine pathway and manually trigger the cool down that chemistry forgot to send. To make this more tangible, think of your brain as running a daily operating system upgrade. When dopamine fires on time in the morning, it installs focus software for the day, letting other systems, like melatonin, prep the next shutdown sequence later on. But if that morning installation lags, everything cues late. The evening shutdown happens while you're still mid-download. By night, you're forcing rest mode while the system's still processing files, and of course it resists. Now, here's where understanding all this pays off. If dopamine sets your internal start-of-day timestamp, then the trick to resetting your schedule isn't punishment, it's recalibration. You can't yell your brain into earlier dopamine release, but you can nudge it. Morning light exposure, consistent wake times, structured bursts of movement. These all act as external cues for dopamine release. Essentially, you hack the start of that chemical sunrise. When you shift dopamine earlier, everything else, melatonin, cortisol, energy, gradually follows. But without intervention, the default wiring keeps looping. Sleep deprivation worsens dopamine control, worsening concentration the next day, prompting more impulsivity, more late-night stimulation, and less sleep. It's the perfect closed circle, one that many ADHD adults live in for years thinking it's simply bad habits. The real culprit is biochemical timing mismatch. Look, ADHD isn't just about distraction or hyperactivity. It's a timing disorder in disguise. Dopamine runs the orchestra, and the conductor keeps arriving late. Recognizing that shifts the whole conversation from frustration to strategy. Once you stop seeing delayed sleep as self-sabotage and start seeing it as late dopamine choreography, you can design your nights and mornings to guide that chemistry into balance. So the next time you feel that midnight clarity spark, remember what's happening. The stimulant inside your own brain just clocked in late for work. The goal ahead isn't to fire it, it's to teach it the right shift schedule. And that's where we're heading next, into how these same chemicals ripple outward into the hormones that actually open the gate to sleep itself. Melatonin and cortisol, partners in the intricate dance that decides whether you drift easily or lie awake counting futures. Melatonin, cortisol, and the sleep gate. Okay, now that we've looked at dopamine's delayed schedule, let's talk about what happens next. How this chemical lag messes with melatonin and cortisol, the two hormones that actually open and close the brain's sleep gate. Think of dopamine as the DJ setting the energy level of the party, but melatonin is the one who tells everyone it's time to leave. Cortisol, on the other hand, is the morning cleanup crew that turns the lights back on. When ADHD scrambles dopamine's timing, the whole event schedule shifts. The result? The gate that should close at night and reopen in the morning starts glitching. So first, melatonin. It's not a sedative. It doesn't knock you out. It's more like a signal flag that tells your body, night has arrived, lower the volume. About 2 hours before your natural bedtime, the pineal gland in your brain begins secreting this hormone as daylight fades. That rising tide sends instructions across the body. Slow the heart rate, drop the core temperature, ease alertness. When the rhythm runs smoothly, you start yawning right on cue. But in ADHD, when dopamine stalls late, melatonin's signal gets jammed. It still rises, but hours behind schedule. So instead of building calm around 10 p.m., that biochemistry begins closer to midnight or later. Research measuring melatonin levels under dim light conditions shows a clear pattern. In many ADHD adults, dim light melatonin onset occurs 2 to 3 hours later than in neurotypical controls. It's not mood or mindset causing it, it's delayed secretion. The pineal gland is basically waiting for dopamine's green light and doesn't release melatonin until the coast is clear. That creates a strange twilight period where your body's caught between systems. You feel tired in theory, yet mentally restless. The mind keeps ticking because the physiological permission to rest hasn't arrived. Now layer in cortisol, the other half of the equation. Cortisol follows an almost opposite rhythm. It's your built-in alarm clock, peaking in the early morning to help you wake, then dropping through the afternoon and reaching its low point around bedtime. In healthy alignment, cortisol and melatonin perform a slow handoff. As cortisol fades, melatonin rises. But when dopamine's timing drags, that transition happens late, or not at all. Sometimes cortisol lingers in the bloodstream too long, keeping you on edge as you're trying to relax. Other times it crashes prematurely, leaving you groggy and unfocused before sleep even starts. Either way, the gate malfunctions. Here's where the metaphor gets literal. Sleep scientists use the term sleep gate to describe the physiological window when conditions line up perfectly for sleep. Body temperature has dipped, melatonin is rising, cortisol is low, and the brain's alertness networks have quieted. Miss that gate, and you're stuck outside for hours until the next one opens. People with ADHD and DSPD often miss every early gate because the hormonal timing is late and out of sync with the external clock. They lie in bed right before the biological switch flips, frustrated that sleep won't come, then pass out hours later, only to be ripped out of deep sleep by an alarm just as the next gate begins. You can actually feel this mismatch if you pay attention. There's usually a short window, maybe 10 to 30 minutes, when your body subtly says, now. If you grab your phone or push through with stimulant activities, dopamine spikes, melatonin drops, and the gate shuts again. That's why one random social scroll at midnight can steal 2 hours of rest. It's not that your body refuses to sleep. It's that you accidentally triggered a new wave of daytime chemistry. Think of this whole system like airport security for consciousness. Melatonin is the officer announcing boarding for sleep flights. Cortisol schedules the departures. When ADHD chemistry shows up late to check-in, the plane takes off without you, and you spend the night waiting for the next one. Because cortisol peaks late, your body's still scanning the horizon for morning long after bedtime, and by the time dawn arrives, its rhythm collapses out of exhaustion. Here's something interesting. Cortisol and melatonin don't just affect sleep, they directly influence emotional regulation. Studies from the Journal of Affective Disorders found that adults with ADHD who experience chronic sleep delay also show flattened cortisol curves across the day. That means their morning motivation is dulled and evening stress is amplified. Add in emotional hypersensitivity common in ADHD, and you get that familiar pattern of being tense at night and unmotivated in the morning. The chemistry literally supports that feeling. A lot of people interpret this as a character flaw. I'm just not a morning person. But physiologically, your cortisol hasn't synchronized to daylight. Because melatonin rose late, cortisol is trying to respect that timing and delays its own peak. Your body is acting logically. It's the world around it that's out of tune. The mismatch becomes most painful when alarms or obligations force an early start, yanking you out of REM sleep while cortisol is still climbing. Ever notice how those mornings feel emotionally fragile? You're not imagining it. Cortisol abruptly interrupted leads to irritability, anxiety, and that sense of carrying static electricity under your skin all day. Let's talk temperature for a moment, because it's quietly tied into this same loop. Right before natural sleep, core temperature drops by about 1 degree Celsius. That dip helps melatonin do its job. When melatonin is delayed, this thermal drop happens hours later too. That's why a cold shower or cool bedroom sometimes helps ADHD sleepers. You're artificially sending the nighttime signal your hormones were late delivering. It's a shortcut through the gate. And here's where the cycle doubles back into daily life. Because of this delay, you often wake up during the wrong hormonal phase. Cortisol mid-rise, melatonin still on the way down. That overlap makes you groggy for hours, no matter how long you slept. It's called sleep inertia, and it's different from simple tiredness. Your biology is literally transitioning between night and day while you're already in the shower. No coffee can speed that up. It resolves only when melatonin fully clears the receptors. When people tell you to just go to bed earlier, they miss this entire sequence. You can't open the sleep gate with brute force. It opens only when the signals align. That's why success in managing ADHD sleep issues often comes from focusing on timing cues, light exposure, routine, temperature, rather than willpower. You adjust the environment to help melatonin rise on time, and let cortisol reset naturally, instead of trying to command the process consciously. It's worth noting that this misalignment also affects immunity and metabolism. Melatonin regulates antioxidant production and cell repair, while cortisol influences inflammation. Delay them for months, and your body can drift into chronic fatigue or mild immune dysfunction. It's not burnout in the psychological sense, it's physical desynchronization. You can think of it as running your phone's battery from 10% to 100% at random intervals. Eventually, calibration drifts and performance drops. Alignment repairs that calibration. So the takeaway here is simple but profound. Your struggle to fall asleep isn't weakness. It's a mechanical breakdown in timing signals. Dopamine stalled, melatonin hesitated, cortisol mistimed the handoff, and the gate never fully opened. The fix isn't shame, it's synchronization. Once the cues line up again, sleep often returns naturally without medication. And that's where we're heading next, into how society, with its early schedules and bright nights, keeps yanking at this fragile chemical dance, punishing people for biological rhythms they didn't choose. To really heal that misalignment, we have to understand not just the hormones inside the body, but the world that constantly tugs them out of tune. The biological clash between society and your brain. Here's where the science hits real life. The collision between your biological rhythm and a society that runs on an entirely different clock. You've got a body calibrated to a late start, but a culture built around early light and early deadlines. That mismatch isn't just inconvenient, it's genuinely punishing. You wake already in deficit, racing to keep up with people who've been awake since their chemistry said go. And after enough mornings like that, you stop questioning the system and start questioning yourself. When your internal day begins 3 hours late, an 8 a.m. class or meeting feels like being asked to perform in the middle of your night. Neurologically, that's exactly what's happening. Your melatonin hasn't cleared yet. Cortisol hasn't peaked. Dopamine hasn't started its early day ramp-up. You're basically expected to think and act during what your body still counts as deep night. No amount of coffee or motivational podcasts can override hormone timing. You're fighting your own endocrine system with caffeine as a sword. This conflict starts early in life. School schedules were designed for agricultural societies, not neurodiverse brains. Kids with ADHD often get labeled unmotivated because they struggle to wake, focus, or remember basics in those first morning hours. They're hauled through miles of self-blame before anyone points out that their internal clock is simply out of phase with the school bell. By adolescence, when circadian rhythms naturally shift later for everyone, ADHD kids are hit twice. Biology moves forward, institutions stay fixed. The stress that creates doesn't disappear in adulthood, it just changes costume. A lot of adults end up living double lives. Structured productivity by day, restoration and creativity after dark. You might finish your workday drained and foggy, then suddenly come alive around 9 p.m. The brain finally aligns, thoughts clear, emotions settle, and then guilt arrives. Because this is when you're supposed to sleep. You feel punished for feeling awake. That guilt feeds anxiety, which triggers another cortisol spike, which delays sleep even further. And now you're not just tired, you're ashamed of being tired. Researchers call the full-out chronic circadian misalignment. It's a fancy term for living perpetually jet-lagged. In sleep labs, people with ADHD who maintain early schedules show the same hormonal patterns as travelers crossing multiple time zones. But permanently, cortisol peaks later, alertness drifts, body temperature cycles scatter. Every workweek becomes a 5-day red-eye flight. And when the weekend finally comes, you crash, attempting to pay off sleep debt that physiology shouldn't have accrued in the first place. That's when another phenomenon sneaks in, social jet lag. You naturally drift to your true rhythm on days off, finally sleeping from 2 a.m. to 10 a.m., maybe even feeling normal again. But Monday slams the clock back. Suddenly, you've shifted your internal time zone twice in 48 hours. Studies link that repeated phase flip to metabolic issues, brain fog, mood swings, and increased anxiety. In simpler terms, your biology never knows what planet it's on. Here's the cruel irony. Society rewards early risers with moral virtue. The early bird gets the worm sounds motivational until you realize it's neurochemically biased. When dopamine peaks early and energy aligns with sunrise, you fit the world's template automatically. When it peaks late, you're marked lazy before your first coffee. That moral framing is what turns a simple timing difference into psychological damage. You can't win because you're trying to race an invisible clock that starts hours before yours does. And it's not just emotional, it's cognitive. Sleep restriction dulls the prefrontal cortex, the same region ADHD already strains. Executive function, working memory, and impulse control all rely on good sleep architecture. When you yank an ADHD brain awake mid-REM, you're not only stealing rest, you're slicing concentration, planning, and self-control for the entire next day. Research from the National Institutes of Health shows that even 1 week of restricted or misaligned sleep drops attention performance as sharply as mild intoxication. Imagine operating like that indefinitely. It's no wonder burnout stalks neurodivergent adults long before others. Then there's the economic cost. Late chronotypes earn less on average, not because of productivity differences, but scheduling mismatch. Workplaces built around morning performance indirectly discriminate against delayed rhythms. Creativity peaks after dark, but productivity metrics measure mornings. So ADHD individuals often deliver their best ideas at the wrong hour for visibility. Over time, that invisibility morphs into imposter syndrome. If I struggle with 9 to 5, maybe I'm not cut out for adult life. Nothing could be further from the truth. You're just wired for a different solar rhythm. This clash shapes relationships too. Partners who wake early often misread late-night wakefulness as avoidance, irresponsibility, or addiction to stimulation. But what looks like choosing the screen over sleep might be the only hour your brain chemistry finally quiets enough for introspection. You aren't resisting connection. You're finally at rest within your own tempo. Explaining that gently shifts the dynamic from judgment to understanding. If there's a mantra worth keeping, it's this: you're punished for a rhythm you didn't choose. The system glorifies conformity over biology. Yet the irony is every attempt to fix yourself by force, earlier alarms, harsher routines, stricter discipline, usually worsens misalignment. The brain reads that stress as threat, pumps more cortisol, delays melatonin again, and resets the vicious loop. It's like trying to push a river upstream instead of walking to where it bends naturally. One striking meta-analysis from 2022 found that when ADHD adults shifted work or study schedules even 1 hour later, subjective well-being improved nearly 70%. Attention scores rose, mood stabilized, and sleep satisfaction doubled. Same people, different timing. That's how powerful alignment is. It's not new medicine, it's new scheduling. The problem isn't competency, it's temporal incompatibility. So the real challenge isn't training yourself out of lateness. It's negotiating with a culture built on an outdated chronotype. Industrial society built its time grid around factory shifts and daylight labor. Our brains never updated to match that rhythm. The modern world's obsession with productivity hours ignores that evolution programmed diverse circadian roles for community survival. Without night thinkers and late sentinels, early humans wouldn't have endured. What was once advantageous wiring got pathologized by fluorescent schedules. Here's the bigger truth hiding underneath all the science. When your body resists the world's tempo, it's not rebellion, it's resonance with another beat. Your rhythm hasn't failed. It's simply unsynced with the artificial clock that governs most of modern life. Recognizing that breaks shame's spell. You stop forcing yourself into a pattern designed for another kind of nervous system. And paradoxically, that acceptance is the first step to real alignment, because relaxed brains respond better to time cues than stressed ones. We can't all quit the 9 to 5 reality, but we can learn to move within it strategically. Adjust light exposure, negotiate flexible starts, build micro-routines that honor delay instead of punishing it. Because once you work with your body's timing rather than against it, the same traits that seemed like liabilities, late creativity, nocturnal focus, deep bursts of flow, turn into assets you can schedule intentionally. The goal isn't to copy the world's clock, it's to sync your internal one just enough to coexist peacefully with it. And that's where we go next, into the biological GPS that governs all of these signals, the system in your brain that watches light, reads darkness, and secretly decides what time it thinks it is. Understanding how that light-dark tracker operates is the key to bridging biology and society without burning out in between. The light-dark system, how your brain tracks time. If everything we've talked about so far sounds like your body is running on the wrong schedule, that's because inside your brain there's an actual structure acting as the timekeeper. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, two tiny clusters of neurons sitting just above the optic nerves. These little circuits are what tell the rest of the body what time it is. They keep rhythm by reading light itself. When sunlight hits your eyes in the morning, that light isn't just for vision. It's also sending an instant signal straight to the SCN saying, the day has begun. From there, the SCN resets every other clock in your system. The liver, heart, gut, even your skin cells follow its lead. Now here's where ADHD complicates things. The brain's sensitivity to those light cues tends to be weaker. You might roll out of bed and see daylight, but chemically, your brain hasn't recognized it yet. The SCN is waiting for a strong enough light pulse to say, okay, new day. If that input doesn't arrive, your brain just drifts, still holding on to the previous night's rhythm. That's why morning sunlight exposure is so powerful. It's like hitting the sync button on a wayward device. But in neurodiverse brains, especially when dopamine signaling runs late, that sync request doesn't always go through on the first try. Think of your internal clock like a GPS that needs a satellite connection every morning. When the signal is clear, sunlight on your retinas early in the day, the GPS recalibrates instantly. When the connection's weak or delayed, dim indoor light, closed curtains, screens instead of sunlight, the clock drifts further out of alignment. Over days, that becomes significant. By the end of the week, your physiology could be running hours behind local time. Light is the SCN's main language, but darkness is just as essential. At night, when brightness fades, the SCN cues the pineal gland to begin melatonin release. In people with ADHD or DSPD, dim environments don't register as dark enough soon enough. Blue light from screens mimics sunrise wavelengths, so the SCN keeps telling the body it's daytime. Even tiny LEDs or hallway light leaking under a door can keep that signal humming. You end up with an internal system stubbornly insisting it's afternoon, while the outside world sleeps. Researchers studying ADHD circadian patterns found that some individuals require up to twice as much morning light for the SCN to reset compared to non-ADHD participants. It's not willpower, it's physics inside your eyes. Specialized retinal cells containing melanopsin respond to blue-rich light around 480 nanometers. That signal travels directly to the SCN. Miss that early hit of brightness, and you lose your anchor for the day. So if you wake and immediately check your phone, you're giving your brain weak, artificial light that doesn't carry enough strength to reset its master clock. You start the day chemically unanchored. Here's the irony. Most people with ADHD say mornings feel unbearable because they aren't fully awake yet. That's literally true. Cortisol may start to rise, but without that potent light cue, dopamine stays sluggish. The SCN remains uncertain. Imagine an orchestra warming up without a conductor, each section guessing when to enter. That's your body's organs trying to coordinate without a firm signal from light. The result is grogginess, disorganization, even emotional fog. Once sunlight finally hits strong enough levels, sometimes hours later, clarity kicks in, confirming the clock has finally updated. So the simplest fix often feels counterintuitive. Go outside before the brain feels ready. 10 to 20 minutes of natural light within an hour of waking acts like an electric reset. Even cloudy daylight is multiple times brighter than indoor lamps. That brightness floods the SCN with the message that the cosmic day has started. Once the master clock acknowledges that, dopamine rises sooner, mood steadies, and melatonin knows exactly when to fall later. Evening light control matters just as much. Because the SCN resets from whatever light it sees last, late night exposure trains it to expect daytime later and later. That's why amber filters, dim lamps, and screen limits after sunset genuinely help. They aren't about discipline, they're about information hygiene, teaching the SCN when darkness means night again. Think of it as translating modern lighting back into a language your ancient circuitry understands. ADHD brains also show more variability in the amplitude of circadian rhythms. That means the difference between day and night signals is weaker. Day isn't bright enough, night isn't dark enough. The solution lies in exaggeration. Brighter mornings, darker nights. Some specialists call this circadian contrast therapy, and it's ridiculously simple. Flood the body with genuine light early, then treat evenings like a gentle cave. Warm tones, minimal screens. Over 2 to 3 weeks, that contrast retrains the SCN's timing with surprising precision. But here's where things get fascinating for self-understanding. The SCN doesn't work alone. Every cell has its mini clock called a peripheral oscillator. These mini clocks take cues not just from light, but from behavior. When you eat, move, and focus. So even if morning light starts the process, meals, exercise, and attention patterns keep reinforcing it. Regular breakfast right after sun exposure, even something small, sends a timestamp to the liver that matches the brain's cue. Exercise early? The muscles get the memo too. You're essentially syncing a constellation of clocks through ritual rather than coercion. Conversely, chaotic patterns, skipping meals, random naps, erratic screen use, feed noise into this network. The SCN gives mixed orders, and each peripheral clock drifts independently. That's when you feel wildly alert at midnight, but half asleep during meetings. Circadian scientists describe that state as internal desynchrony. Your organs disagree on what time it is. ADHD traits like impulsivity and irregular routines intensify it. Stability restores order. Let's also touch the spiritual dimension, because viewers of Unplugged psychology care about that layer. The daily dance of light and dark, wakening and rest, isn't just about productivity. It mirrors the balance of consciousness itself. The SCN mediates more than hormones. It mediates rhythm between being and becoming. When that rhythm noses off course, we experience existential static, a feeling of being out of phase, not only with society, but with the universe. Reconnecting through literal sunlight becomes an embodied form of realignment. A daily act of remembering we are part of the planet's rotation, not separate from it. So the light-dark system is both mechanical and mystical. Mechanically, it's photons triggering retinal circuits that talk to a cluster of neurons. Mystically, it's the oldest conversation the body has with the cosmos. Light says rise, darkness says return. People with ADHD just have weaker translators between those two languages. But translators can be trained. Practical takeaways? Treat morning light as medicine. Step outside even for a minute. No sunglasses, no phone brightness. Let natural light hit your eyes safely. In the evening, lower brightness 2 hours before sleep. Swap screens for warmer glows. Signal the brain that night has returned. Over time, those tiny rituals re-educate the SCN, push dopamine to release earlier, and invite melatonin back on schedule. You start to feel the world's rhythm meeting your own again, rather than crashing against it. That's the quiet power of understanding your internal light detector. You stop blaming motivation and start engineering illumination. The message of daylight isn't moral, it's molecular. Once your SCN catches the right signal, the rest of the system follows, no sermon required. And as we move forward, we'll translate this physiology into strategy. Specific steps to rebuild your rhythm from the outside in, turning light and timing into allies for a calmer, predictable sleep cycle. Simple science-backed fixes. Alright, let's pull this out of chemistry class and back into something you can actually do tonight. Because once you understand that delayed dopamine and late melatonin are just timing errors, the next question is obvious. How do you reset the clock? The answer isn't more discipline or expensive supplements. It's consistency, light, and small environmental tweaks that nudge the body into remembering when day and night truly are. Think of it like teaching your internal orchestra how to follow the conductor again, one cue at a time. First up, the morning light rule. And yes, this one's non-negotiable. Within 60 minutes of waking, get outside or stand by a bright window for 10 to 20 minutes. Not through the blinds, not after coffee, but now. That photon burst through your eyes tells the suprachiasmatic nucleus. The world has started. When the SCN catches that message, it triggers dopamine release sooner, which in turn anchors your cortisol to the correct sunrise and pushes melatonin to shut down earlier. It's a cascade that resets your entire biological calendar. Even on cloudy days, outdoor light is 10 times stronger than any bulb inside. No supplement replicates that. If you can pair that sunlight with movement, it doesn't have to be a workout. Even stretching or a short walk amplifies dopamine and signals active day mode. Bonus: exposure to natural light while in motion doubles the SCN's sensitivity to that signal. You're using your senses in stereo, eyes and muscles saying the same thing, so your internal clock listens. Think of it as syncing the brain's weather app with real conditions instead of the fantasy forecast it woke up with. Next, let's talk about melatonin timing, because this is where many people go wrong. The supplement itself works, but dosage and schedule matter more than people realize. Most adults don't need those 5 mg mega pills you see at pharmacies. Research shows that low doses, around 0.3 to 1 mg, taken 4 to 6 hours before desired sleep, are far more effective for shifting the circadian rhythm. You're not trying to knock yourself out. You're using melatonin like a gentle push to start the nighttime process earlier. Taken right before bed, it just sits in your system confused, blocked by dopamine that hasn't settled yet. So, if you want to start sleeping around midnight instead of 2, that means taking a small dose between 6 and 8 p.m. under dim light conditions for a few weeks. Once your body recalibrates, you can taper off and let it produce melatonin naturally. Think of the supplement as jump-starting a car. You don't leave the cables connected forever. And if you're sensitive to synthetic hormones, you can achieve a similar effect through food-based tryptophan sources, like tart cherries, oats, or turkey, paired with darkness exposure at that same early evening window. Now we move to the villain of modern circadian health: screens. Blue light from phones and monitors basically tells your eyes, it's morning again. That 480 nanometer wavelength hits the melanopsin receptors and delays melatonin release by up to 90 minutes. If you're watching videos at 11 p.m., you just told your brain the sun rose at 11. No wonder your sleep gate never opens. The simplest fix: convert your environment to amber mode after 9 p.m. Screens on night shift, lamps with warm bulbs, maybe even candles if you want to go medieval with it. You're training your body to recognize darkness again, not fighting addiction. Some people swear by blue-blocking glasses. The science is mixed, but anecdotally they help because they act as psychological reminders to slow down. The key isn't to fear screens, but to set a digital sunset. A firm cutoff an hour before sleep where dopamine and light stop spiking. If that sounds impossible, replace scrolling with something tactile but low stimulation. Sketching, stretching, or tidying. You're not eliminating dopamine. You're redirecting it to quiet activities that let melatonin climb unopposed. Caffeine deserves a whole conversation too. It's not just a stimulant. It literally shifts the body clock when mistimed. A caffeine dose taken 6 hours before bed can delay melatonin onset by almost an hour. That means your afternoon coffee, the one you think is harmless, is probably coaching your body to stay awake later. Aim to cut caffeine by early afternoon, ideally before 2 p.m. And remember, chocolate, energy drinks, and even some ADHD medications add to that load. If tapering down feels impossible, pair caffeine with bright light in the morning to make its stimulation land in the right phase instead of drifting nocturnal. Food timing also acts as a time cue. Your liver has its own little clock, and it listens primarily to when calories arrive. If you eat heavy meals late at night, that organ decides it's still daytime, which communicates through hormones back to the brain, confusing melatonin's pattern. Try shifting your last significant meal 2 to 3 hours before bed and having breakfast soon after waking. Even a protein snack in the morning helps push dopamine's daily rhythm forward. The secret is consistency. Same windows every day, like setting mechanical gears into rhythm. Speaking of consistency, the circadian system despises spontaneity. That's hard for ADHD brains that crave novelty, but think of routine as scaffolding for creativity. Go to bed and wake up at roughly the same time every day, including weekends. Each consistent cue, light, food, movement, temperature, tightens the rhythm until melatonin and dopamine learn their choreography. Miss a day? No guilt, just resume the next morning light cycle. The body doesn't need perfection, it needs repetition. Another powerful, yet overlooked factor is temperature manipulation. Lowering your bedroom temperature by just 2 degrees helps trigger melatonin's cascade. Warm showers followed by cool air create an artificial drop that signals nightfall. Weighted blankets enhance that cooling effect by encouraging stillness and vagal calm, helping the body slide through its sleep gate easily. You can even hack this in the morning, exposing yourself to mild cold, like a splash of water or brisk air, signals cortisol to rise earlier and reinforces that this is the new beginning of day. Want one more dopamine hack? Schedule something mildly rewarding early. Music, light exercise, even an engaging task you like. Doing something interesting right after that morning light exposure trains your dopamine system to associate wakefulness with reward. Over time, you're literally rewiring motivation to wake earlier. That's not superstition. It's basic reinforcement learning, except you're the trainer, not the trainee. Now, let's address the elephant in the room: medication timing. If you're on stimulant medication for ADHD, discuss with your doctor whether earlier dosing could reduce nighttime alertness. Taking them too late in the day often delays dopamine clearance and keeps you wired past midnight. But don't adjust independently. Pharmacological schedules are delicate. Still, it's worth a conversation because for many adults, that simple adjustment breaks the 3 a.m. cycle permanently. Here's a template routine pulling all this together. Wake around the same time daily. Step into real sunlight within an hour. Move, breathe, hydrate. Eat a small breakfast soon after. Keep caffeine front-loaded before lunch. Expose yourself to bright light through midday. As sunset approaches, start dimming your environment. Take low-dose melatonin, if using it, 4 to 6 hours before planned bedtime. Eat your last meal at least 2 hours before sleep. Cool your room, minimize blue light, and wind down with calm activities. Wake, repeat, refine. Within 2 to 3 weeks, your brain will start shifting earlier with minimal frustration. It sounds tedious, but think of it this way. Your body is an analog machine in a digital world. The planet runs on sunrise and nightfall, not on your inbox. These daily cues, light, food, heat, environment, are the physical language that tells your biology what time it is. Once you speak that language clearly, your delayed rhythm gradually harmonizes with the world around you. The deeper wisdom hiding inside these practical steps is this. Regulation is built, not forced. You're not fighting your brain into obedience. You're teaching it to hear the planetary rhythm again. Every morning you meet the sun, every evening you dim your world, you're saying to your nervous system, we belong here, now, in this cycle. And once that dialogue returns, sleep follows not as a battle won, but as a conversation restored. The emotional toll of circadian misalignment. Let's pause the science for a second and talk about what this actually feels like. Because it's one thing to know your dopamine fires late. It's another to live inside that delay every night. The exhaustion, the guilt, the self-talk loops where you swear tomorrow will be different. You know them well. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, negotiating with yourself. If I fall asleep now, I'll still get 6 hours. Then 5. Then 4. And somewhere between despair and acceptance, you doze off, only to wake feeling half-assembled. By breakfast, you're already behind on the day that just began. The emotional weight of that pattern can be crushing. It's not dramatic, it's cumulative. Each morning feels like starting a marathon at mile 10. And when people throw casual lines like, just go to bed earlier, it cuts deeper than they realize. You've tried that. You've tried it 100 times. But when your body says no, and the world keeps saying should, you start to translate misalignment into failure. That's how many ADHD sleepers quietly internalize shame. They mistake biology for character. Over time, that shame hardens into identity. I'm unreliable. I'm lazy. I'm not disciplined enough to adult. But none of those statements touch the truth. The truth is you've been wrestling a miswired circadian system that punishes you for its own lag. And because society idolizes early risers, your rhythm becomes a moral issue instead of a mechanical one. That's psychological erosion, plain and simple. There's also a strange loneliness to it. When everyone else winds down at 10, you're still buzzing. Too awake to sleep, too tired to connect. You scroll through glowing rectangles that mirror your own sleepless glow. The world's asleep, but you're halfway between Monday and Mars, unsure which time zone you belong to. Relationships strain under that. Partners misinterpret late nights as avoidance or irresponsibility. You promise, genuinely, that you're coming to bed soon, but soon stretches into hours. Then guilt joins the pile, and guilt, as we know, is insomnia's favorite stimulant. That mix, guilt, fatigue, misunderstanding, breeds a feeling psychologists call learned helplessness. Every attempt to fix sleep that fails sends your brain the message, nothing works. So you stop trying. You surrender to the pattern, half believing this is just how you are. But underneath that defeat is grief, the quiet grief of someone estranged from rest. People underestimate how spiritual that loss feels. Sleep isn't just downtime. It's belonging, it's integration, it's where the psyche resets. Losing that rhythm feels like being locked out of your own home every night. Then come the mood swings. Chronically delayed sleepers often ride a wave of irritability that flares around noon and collapses mid-afternoon. Depression risks rise sharply when circadian cycles stay off track. Part of that is biochemical, serotonin and dopamine fluctuate with light. But part is existential. When every day begins in deficit, hope becomes a luxury. You start organizing life around fatigue, canceling plans, avoiding calls, numbing with entertainment. Your world shrinks to fit your energy budget, which keeps getting smaller. It's worth naming the paradox here. ADHD already makes emotional regulation harder, and sleep loss amplifies every feeling. That means guilt burns hotter, sadness drags longer, frustration spikes quicker. You end up trapped in what feels like constant emotional weather. Storms that appear without warning, dissolve at random, and return as soon as you think the sky's clear. The pattern teaches you to distrust your own moods. Some nights it's anger, at your brain, your schedule, your alarm clock, existence itself. Other nights it's a weird clarity, a flash of creativity that feels both gift and curse. You sketch, write, or clean compulsively, half rejoicing in that focus, half mourning that it arrived so late. That's the tragic beauty of delayed rhythms. They grant their best energy when the world gives you least permission to use it. Let's address another layer: self-judgment disguised as motivation. You wake groggy and swear to reform. You buy planners, apps, routines. For 2 nights you nail bedtime, then relapse once and declare internal defeat. Why? Because the underlying rhythm never changed, only behavior did. When results don't match effort, anxiety deepens. You start catastrophizing. If I can't even manage sleep, how can I manage life? The mind links simple biological lag with global incompetence. That's how small circadian errors grow into identity wounds. There's an emotional catch here that's rarely discussed. Delayed sleepers often experience what researchers call chronotype discrimination. It's real-world stigma against late schedules, bosses labeling you unreliable, friends teasing your mornings, partners equating being awake at night with immaturity. Over years, that external judgment fuses with your inner critic. You don't just live tired, you live apologetic. Breaking that loop requires reframing, not discipline. You stop chasing normal and start chasing alignment. You begin viewing fatigue as feedback, not failure. That subtle shift, seeing grogginess as data instead of doom, changes everything. Because feedback can be adjusted, doom can't. Once shame loosens, experimentation becomes possible again. Light exposure, morning rituals, calm evenings. Each small success rebuilds trust between you and your body. And here's where emotion meets biology again. When you replace self-criticism with curiosity, cortisol drops. Literally, the act of self-acceptance weakens the stress response, delaying melatonin. That means emotional gentleness isn't fluffy, it's physiological repair. The nervous system listens to tone. Talk to yourself like a malfunctioning device you're patient with, not a misbehaving child. That's neurochemical caregiving in action. But even with awareness, there's grief in recognizing how much life you've spent swimming upstream. Missed mornings, jobs lost, relationships strained. Some of that pain won't vanish just because you understand dopamine now. Healing requires forgiving those past selves who fought biology with nothing but guilt. They weren't lazy, they were unsynchronized. Here's where the spiritual lens starts to matter. Being out of sync invites humility. Realizing you're not separate from nature's rhythms, but you've been orbiting slightly off. Each night of struggle whispers the same message: return. When you finally do, through routine or light or sheer patience, rest feels sacred. Sleep becomes more than recovery. It becomes reconciliation with your own biology. If you've ever stood at dawn after a sleepless night and felt that quiet ache, the mix of regret and relief, you've tasted that reconciliation already. It's the body whispering, let's start again. The moment you stop interpreting delay as failure, that whisper grows louder. You begin to notice small wins, yawning earlier, thinking gentler thoughts about mornings, feeling less war inside your skin. Progress becomes less about achievement and more about harmony. So when you catch yourself spiraling at 2 a.m., remember this isn't a moral crisis. It's a mechanical echo. Your chemistry is late to the concert, that's all. The antidote isn't discipline, it's tuning. And self-compassion is the first tuning fork. Because once emotion softens, physiology follows. That's when the deeper work begins, turning this frustration into purpose, finding meaning in your unique tempo. And that brings us naturally to the next layer. Maybe being out of sync isn't purely a defect. Maybe it's an invitation to see rhythm itself, light and dark, action and rest, as symbols of balance within you. What happens if we treat your delayed sleep not as something to cure, but as something to integrate, to draw wisdom from? Let's explore that perspective next, where biology meets spirit, and time itself becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. Spiritual and psychological integration. Up to now we've looked at chemistry, timing, and hormones. But beneath all that circuitry runs something more subtle: how rhythm shapes identity and connection. Because if you're watching this channel, You already know biology isn't the full story. The question that lingers after all this science is spiritual. What does it mean to live out of sync with the world's clock? And how do you make peace with that without losing yourself? Let's start with a simple truth. Light and darkness are ancient languages. Every civilization has told stories about them: creation, balance, growth, decay. These aren't just poetic symbols. They mirror the same oscillation happening inside every cell of your body. When your circadian rhythm falls out of tune, you feel it not just as fatigue, but as existential dissonance, a sense that life is humming in a key you can't quite reach. That's why restoring rhythm often feels like healing more than habit building. It's the psyche and the planet finding their harmony again. For many with ADHD or DSPD, the disorder feels like being trapped between phases of consciousness. Daylight feels premature, night overstays its welcome. But through a psychological lens, that twilight zone represents the border between control and surrender, the two poles every human wrestles with. The world worships the solar side: productivity, clarity, the measurable. Yet ADHD brains often dwell in the lunar realm: imagination, intuition, deep focus that blooms after sunset. Maybe that isn't failure at all. Maybe it's simply a different doorway into awareness. When you start to see your delayed rhythm symbolically, shame loosens its grip. You begin to recognize yourself as part of a wider spectrum of human timing. Some people are designed to lead at dawn, others guard the perimeter at night. From a spiritual standpoint, both are sacred roles in the collective dance of vigilance and rest. If your mind feels most alive under stars, that doesn't make you broken. It just means your consciousness orbits that reflective light rather than the glaring one of noon. Psychology calls this reframing, but in spiritual language, it's alchemy. You're transforming the same raw material, exhaustion, frustration, guilt, into understanding. The question shifts from, how do I fix this, to what is this teaching me about the rhythm of being human? Maybe the lesson is patience. Maybe it's surrender to cycles larger than personal will. Every night you fight insomnia, you're facing the same archetype mystics spoke of for centuries: the restless human mind learning to let go into darkness. Lighting researchers accidentally reinforce that metaphor. They've discovered that when people spend a few nights camping away from artificial light, circadian and emotional rhythms realign within days. It's as if the body never forgot the pattern. It just needed the sky's instruction again. That's spirituality grounded in physiology. The cosmos whispering through photons. Come back to our timing. The process isn't mystical in the abstract. It's measurable and sacred simultaneously. So what does integration look like for someone living with ADHD? It starts with honesty. You stop dividing yourself into productive daytime self and wayward night self. They're not enemies, they're phases of the same cycle. When you stop moralizing one and shaming the other, the nervous system relaxes enough to re-establish natural rhythm. That shift in attitude literally changes chemistry. Lower cortisol, steadier dopamine, deeper rest. Kindness is medicine here, not metaphor. You can turn this understanding into ritual, the language the body loves most. Greet morning light consciously, as practice, not chore. Maybe say, I align with the sun's rhythm, even if you still feel half asleep. In the evening, when you dim screens and lamps, treat that darkness as sanctuary, not deprivation. Small ceremonies like this train both brain and spirit to cooperate. What was once rigidity becomes reverence. There's also psychological integration, the part where knowledge becomes embodiment. Recognize that timing differences influence identity formation. Many ADHD individuals grow up equating lateness with irresponsibility, so their self-concept forms around that stigma. Healing means rewriting that script. My timing is unique, not defective. Over months of disciplined light management and emotional gentleness, that statement turns from affirmation into truth your body believes. Sleep becomes proof of self-acceptance. Spiritually, delayed rhythm can be reframed as a call toward introspection. While daytime minds chase output, yours might naturally inhabit the liminal hours, the threshold between thoughts where intuition speaks louder. Artists, philosophers, and mystics throughout history describe creative clarity arriving at night when the analytic world sleeps. Perhaps your circadian pattern places you closer to that boundary by design, offering insight society forgot how to value. Integration doesn't mean rejecting that gift. It means balancing it so you can live without suffering from it. From a Jungian view, darkness isn't the enemy. It's the unconscious asking to be known. People with delayed sleep live more often in literal darkness, so they interact daily with that symbolism. When approached consciously, that can cultivate depth, a relationship with shadow rather than fear of it. The practice becomes learning to move between worlds, using morning light to anchor the body and night stillness to nourish imagination. That's synchronization of psyche, not just clock. Of course, spiritual romanticizing can't replace structure. Discipline grounds mysticism. Set rhythms first, let meaning unfold later. Otherwise, night soul becomes an excuse for self-neglect. Integration means both slash and respect biology and honor symbolism. You meditate with the sunrise and also manage your melatonin timing. You pray for balance and also keep your phone on amber mode. The sacred hides in practical repetition. Another layer of integration involves how you relate to society itself. Once you know your rhythm, you can negotiate boundaries without guilt, declining early meetings, requesting flexible hours, explaining that productivity peaks later. Transparency transforms relationships. People respond better to calmly stated biology than to hidden exhaustion. That honesty is spiritual, too. Truth in communication instead of masking. Masking drains dopamine. Authenticity replenishes it. Over time, this knowledge shapes identity into coherence. You go from fighting time to partnering with it. Each morning you step into sunlight becomes an act of humble cooperation with forces bigger than you. Each evening ritual becomes gratitude for darkness returning. Sleep ceases to be a battle and becomes communion, a nightly rehearsal of death and rebirth, losing consciousness to find it again renewed. Many spiritual traditions describe enlightenment not as constant awareness, but as perfect rhythm between waking and rest. Ultimately, integrating the science with spirituality reframes ADHD sleep struggles from curse to curriculum. Biology teaches presence. Your body shows you what forcing doesn't work. Psychology teaches compassion. Your emotions reveal where judgment hides. Spirituality teaches rhythm. Everything moves between poles, and peace comes from moving with it. When you put those lessons together, insomnia stops defining you. It becomes your initiation into understanding cycles themselves. So if you're watching this still at midnight, hearing your mind buzz while the world sleeps, take this not as failure, but as invitation. Tonight can mark the start of honorable dialogue with darkness. Step outside, glance at the moon, feel the planet turning beneath you. That motion is your heartbeat scaled to cosmic size. You are never truly out of sync. You're just learning the texture of time. Once you listen closely enough, even silence has rhythm. And that's where real rest begins. Reclaiming a healthy rhythm, mind, body, and soul. Everything we've talked about, dopamine, melatonin, the light-dark system, leads to one truth. Repairing your sleep isn't just about biology. It's about restoring coherence across all levels of yourself. Because in the end, your rhythm isn't limited to heartbeat or hormones. It runs through thought, emotion, and awareness. When those fall back into tempo, the whole being starts to breathe together again. That's the real goal, wholeness, not just earlier bedtimes. Let's start with the physical side, because it anchors everything else. Your body thrives on repetitive cues that whisper safety. Wake, fuel, move, rest. Building those cues intentionally forms the spine of circadian repair. Morning light, consistent wake times, structured meals, nightly wind downs. They aren't chores but messages to your nervous system that time is trustworthy again. ADHD often scrambles that sense of continuity. Routine rebuilds it. Over weeks, predictability lowers baseline cortisol, dopamine steadies, and focus follows naturally. You start waking with less panic because your body finally knows what's coming next. Add movement not as punishment, but as calibration. Light exercise before noon pushes dopamine peaks earlier and signals strength to the circadian core. You don't need perfection, just rhythm. Think in loops, not goals. 10 minutes stretching every morning, walk at sunset, stillness at night. These repeating actions teach the body how to hum in a consistent key again. Pair them with mindful breathing to sync mind and body. Inhale for alertness, exhale for surrender. Science meets spirit there, breath acting as your mini clock regulator. Food timing, too, becomes sacred structure. Breakfast aligns the liver clock. Evening fasting allows redox cycles to reset. When you treat eating as rhythm rather than impulse, digestion stops fighting your sleep chemistry. Even hydration participates. A glass of water on waking helps cortisol rise smoother. Less liquid near bedtime lets your body cool. Everything you do in 24 hours either clarifies or confuses the inner timeline. Healing, at its simplest, is removing confusion. Next comes the mental rhythm, what psychologists call cognitive pacing. ADHD minds swing between hyperfocus and drift because attention follows dopamine's waves, not external expectation. The trick is establishing cycles of engagement and rest that mimic natural ultradian rhythms. Roughly 90-minute focus blocks followed by 10-minute decompressions. When you work with that pattern, instead of forcing continuous intensity, you conserve dopamine flow and avoid the late-night rebound. Ironically, pacing discipline during the day breeds peace at night. Then there's the emotional layer. We've already explored guilt and shame. Now we replace them with neutrality. Think of emotions as tides, each carrying data about your internal state. Instead of labeling fatigue as failure or bursts of energy as ADHD chaos, note them as coordinates on your map. That observational stance recruits the prefrontal cortex to interpret feelings instead of drowning in them. Over time, emotional rhythm stabilizes into the same gentle oscillation your hormones are relearning. Morning energy rises without mania. Nighttime calm arrives without collapse. Bring the spiritual rhythm back home by reconnecting to natural cycles beyond human scheduling. Step outside at dawn not just for photons but gratitude. I'm part of this rotation. At dusk, let darkness mean permission to rest, not invisibility. When you tie your personal routines to planetary ones, sleeping and waking stop feeling isolated. They become participation. The earth literally spins you back to balance. That sense of belonging eases the existential restlessness that keeps late thinkers chasing stimulation into the small hours. Here's the deeper perspective. A delayed rhythm isn't something to eliminate. It's a pattern to translate. You speak time differently. The goal is bilingual fluency, keeping society's schedule without betraying your own. Maybe you shift bedtime from 2 a.m. to midnight instead of pretending you're a 10 p.m. sleeper. Maybe mornings start slower, but filled with intentional light, sound, and motion. Flexibility within consistency is the sweet spot. Steady outline, creative details inside it. That's where ritual replaces anxiety. ADHD brains anchor attention through sensory repetition, so build nights rich in cues. Dim amber light, calming scent, specific playlist reserved only for wind down. Train your brain to associate those sensations with safety and closure. Over days, those stimuli trigger melatonin release automatically. Ritual becomes your circadian shorthand. We're landing now. The same cue each evening rewires faster than any supplement because it speaks the body's native language, pattern recognition. Now, zoom out to purpose. Once rhythm steadies, energy freed from survival can return to creation. Many people discover that regulated sleep doesn't kill their nocturnal magic. It compresses it into earlier clarity. Ideas still flow, but in a window that allows recovery afterwards. Your creativity survives, your exhaustion doesn't. That's integration, the union of productivity and peace. You stop choosing between being functional or inspired because stability supports both. On a psychological level, consistently keeping rhythm rebuilds self-trust. Each time you follow through with small-time cues, the brain logs a success memory. Those micro-wins restore dopamine sensitivity over weeks, creating confidence that no affirmation can fake. Self-esteem built on circadian alignment feels oddly spiritual. It's the quiet confidence of being in conversation with time and knowing both sides are listening. Spiritually, this process mirrors the larger journey of evolution described in so many traditions. Chaos seeking coherence, darkness learning its rhythm. Each circadian repair ritual becomes symbolic. Light exposure as gratitude, meals as grounding, rest as surrender. You're turning daily biology into prayer. That reframes self-care from tedious maintenance into participation in cosmic order. The rotation of planets and the expansion of lungs follow the same mathematics of rhythm. Syncing with that isn't metaphorical enlightenment, it's literal alignment. People often ask, when will I finally feel normal? Maybe the better question is, when will normal feel true to me? Because healing rhythm doesn't make you identical to others. It makes you authentic to yourself. When you honor your timing, mornings lose hostility, nights lose guilt, and middle hours regain presence. The pendulum stops overswinging. Time becomes round rather than linear. You start living cyclically, expanding by day, contracting by night, resting without apology. Let's make it concrete again with a balanced day blueprint. Wake at a consistent hour. Sunlight, water, brief motion. Midday, focused work blocks interspersed with short breaks. Afternoon, Slower output, gentle transition. Evening, eat light, dim light. Night, intentional quiet, perhaps journaling gratitude for one synchrony you noticed. A deep breath that arrived easily, a thought that matched action. Those reflections integrate biology with awareness, turning rhythm into self-knowledge. Do this for a month and something subtle happens. Instead of chasing regulation, you embody it. The line between physical routine and meditation dissolves. Your body's predictability becomes the launchpad for spontaneous insight. The ADHD mind, once fragmented across time zones, finally operates within one continuous day. And because consistency frees energy, you find new capacity for relationships, learning, creativity, even joy. Those dawn-colored emotions that thrive only when sleep has reopened the gate. Ultimately, reclaiming a healthy rhythm is an act of reunion. Mind returning to body, body returning to planet, consciousness returning to the pulse it forgot it shared. You learn that rest isn't retreat, but rhythm completing its circle. Every time you line up breath, light, and thought, you whisper to your cells, "We're home." That's not poetic sentiment. That's biology resolved into belonging. So as you rebuild your schedule, measure progress not by what time you sleep, but by how whole you feel when you wake. If the answer is steady, spacious, clear, the work is working. The frontier of healing isn't earlier mornings, it's harmony. And in that harmony, both science and soul quietly agree. When the rhythm returns, everything else finally follows. The quiet miracle of getting sleep right. Here's the truth that everything in this journey has been pointing to. Fixing your rhythm has never been about control. It's about cooperation. The real transformation begins when you stop trying to command your body into obedience and start listening to what it's been trying to tell you all along. This isn't punishment for being different. It's an invitation to collaborate with the miraculous timing device built into your cells. When you start syncing with that inner clock, small details change first. You open your eyes without dread. Morning light doesn't stab, it welcomes. Focus returns not as adrenaline, but as steadiness. Even thoughts feel quieter, not because they've vanished, but because they now arrive in rhythm. What used to feel like chaos slowly rearranges itself into pattern. That's the quiet miracle, not perfection, just alignment. Your body's circadian rhythm has been whispering the same message every day of your life. I'll work with you, not against you, if you meet me halfway. When you finally honor that agreement, everything downstream heals. Hormones, mood, attention, creativity, patience. You reclaim energy that once leaked into fighting time itself. It's like finding out that the locked door you've been pushing for years actually opens toward you. The external world may never perfectly match your timing, but now you have tools. Light becomes language. Consistency becomes compassion. You begin acting from rhythm instead of rebellion. And remarkably, that calm cooperation spills into the rest of your life. Tasks, relationships, even your spiritual practice start syncing to that steadier pulse. The body isn't an obstacle on your spiritual path. It is the path, marked out in 24-hour arcs of surrender and renewal. Each morning sunrise isn't another demand, it's a reset button. Each evening darkness isn't a closing door, it's permission. When you treat those transitions with a touch of reverence, standing at a window, feeling the planet turn, you remember that you're wired into something vast that always holds perfect time. Aligning with it is less about discipline and more about remembering belonging. The chaos of ADHD can make you feel fragmented, but circadian alignment teaches wholeness. You learn that attention, mood, hormones, and even purpose follow one beat. You stop evaluating yourself through productivity and start noticing how life flows when you move with it. The healing is subtle, almost understated. Yet one day, without trying, you realize you're actually well rested. And that sensation feels almost spiritual. When that happens, don't chase bigger hacks or stricter regimens. Just keep honoring the basics. Light at dawn, darkness at night, consistency as kindness. Protect your rhythm the way you'd protect a heartbeat. Because every clear sunrise and easy bedtime is evidence that your biology and consciousness have finally made peace. If this resonated, stay in the exploration. Subscribe, share your experiences below, and join the next episode where we'll decode dopamine regulation hacks for ADHD, the practical side of keeping this newfound balance alive. It's time to stop fighting time and start dancing with it.